It's the dawn of a new day for Texas football recruiting, and that's a damn good thing. I'll tell you what I mean on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Intro!
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You were locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin local, and longtime sports radio host here in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell your Longhorn friends about Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We'll talk about the two commits the Longhorns picked up over the weekend, and we'll also give you the latest transfer portal updates for Longhorn baseball a little bit later in today's show. But first, it's a pretty massive week coming up for Texas's pursuit of another number one recruiting class. 4 highly ranked blue chip targets are set to announce their commitments this week, and Texas has a chance to land all 4 of them. I want to talk a little bit about each player, but more than that, I want to talk about why this week shows you that Texas is recruiting at a different level than they have been in the recent past, and maybe than they have been ever in the past. So we'll talk about these 4 players first. The first Texas target to commit this week will be running back Xavier Crowell. He's going to make his decision on Thursday. We've talked about him a ton. The 4-star running back from Georgia, the second-ranked running back in the class, according to the composite rankings. Texas is in the mix. Georgia's in the mix. Alabama is in the mix as well. And Alabama has been considered the heavy favorite here for a while. And people that I talk to still feel like that's the case. I do wonder if Texas has maybe upped the ante a little bit following KJ Edwards' commitment to Texas A&M, right? Crowell is the only running back who visited Texas in the month of June. KJ Edwards was set to visit. He bailed after he committed to A&M. Derek Cooper never came. So maybe Texas has upped the NIL offer. Maybe they've upped their recruiting efforts to try to land Xavier Crowell. I don't know if that's going to matter. Again, Alabama has been seen as a heavy favorite in this one for a while. We'll all wait and see what happens on Thursday. But Texas, again, still has a chance. They got to visit. Don't count the Longhorns out just yet. 3 more Texas targets in the class of 2026 will commit on Friday. Offensive tackle Malachi Lee from Honolulu, safety Chase Calicut from North Shore High School down in Houston, and defensive lineman Damari Simeon from New Jersey. We'll go in order, starting with Malachi Lee. 4-star offensive lineman, 6'6", about 320 pounds. He was in Austin on a visit in early June. Texas, Michigan, Georgia, and Alabama, the 4 teams doing battle in the final week of Malachi Lee's recruitment. My sources are telling me that this is a Texas-Michigan battle. Georgia probably number 3. I don't think they're throwing in the towel just yet, but it sounds like they are the underdog here. And again, Texas and Michigan feel like they're a leg up over those 2 other SEC schools. I would love to see Texas win this one. Look, this class is coming together nicely. It currently sits at number 10 in the country. But as of this moment, recording on June 24th, the Longhorns only have 1 offensive lineman committed. They've got 15 players total committed. That's the good news. But only 1 of them plays on the offensive line. That is Max Wright, the low 4-star, who is the 23rd ranked tackle in the class. You need more than that. No disrespect to Max Wright. He's been committed for a while. I'm glad he is a part of this class. Easy for me to say, but you would love to get Malachi Lee. Look, if you don't, Felix Ojo, the number 1 player in the state of Texas, still in the mix. John Turntine still in the mix. Texas has other options on the offensive line, so it's not Malachi Lee or bust, but it would be nice for the Longhorns to start to recruit the offensive line in this class the way that they recruited the defensive line in this class. Speaking of the defensive line, Damari Simeon, the D lineman from New Jersey, Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. So it's the Longhorns versus the Big Ten in this one. Texas has been crushing it on the defensive line lately. Vodney Cleveland, we'll talk about him more in segment 2. Corey Wells, Dylan Berryman, all 3 of those D linemen have committed this month. Richard Wesley off the edge. Can Texas land another big fish up front on defense? Sounds like NIL is going to be a big factor in this one. NIL matters in a lot of these recruitments, but this one maybe more so than others. You wonder if Texas is going to have as big of an offer, considering the fact that, again, they've landed 3 defensive line commits in the last 3 weeks. So do they feel the need to try to win a bidding war against Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, who might not have the defensive lineman committed in the class of 2026 that Texas does? We'll see with Damari Simeon. He's another guy committing on Friday. And then Chase Calicut, the Houston North Shore safety. He was in town this past weekend. Texas, Georgia, Alabama, the 3 schools seemingly the most in the mix. I think this feels more like a Texas-Georgia battle from the people that I've talked to. This one could go either way. Sounds like Georgia has put a nice NIL offer on the table for Calicut. We'll see what Texas can do. New DB's coach, Mark Orfe, graduated from North Shore. He played his high school football at North Shore. So Orfe works more with the corners than the safety. Again, Calicut is a safety, but Orfe has been the lead recruiter here. Maybe the fact that those 2 guys went to the same high school could help Texas's chances. Big fan of Chase Calicut, 6'3", 190. That's the size and length that you want in a safety. The 13th ranked safety in the class, the 23rd ranked player in the state of Texas. And he recently gave some quotes to 24/7 about his visit that he just took to Austin, again, this past weekend. He compared Texas to the other visits he had been taking. He said, quote, "I think Texas really blew them out of the water. I don't know. It was just home. It just seems right. It just feels right," end quote. So a number of other schools were in the mix. Ole Miss and Washington hung around for a long time. But again, I think this is a Texas-Georgia battle. Hopefully Calicut will stay closer to home. North Shore, one of the premier high school programs in the state of Texas. You love getting guys from that school. It's like Duncanville, right? You know those guys are developed. You know they've played in some big games. You want to bring in as many North Shore guys, Duncanville guys, Allen guys, Katy guys. There's a number of schools, Westlake, Lake Travis, number of schools across the state that you want to really recruit. North Shore is one of those. So we'll see what happens with Chase Calicut, who commits on Friday. But again, we talked about those 4 players and gave you a little bit of a preview of what's going to happen this week. I want to spend more time focusing on the big picture here. I want you all to take a second and consider the teams that Texas is recruiting against for each of those 4 players. Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. That's the entire list. All 4 of those players are only considering those schools. Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas. That is indicative of a new dawn for Texas recruiting. We're not talking about Texas TCU battles anymore. We're not talking about Texas Baylor or Texas Houston. This is different. I'm not sure. I've been covering Texas since starting college back in 2012, but as a professional since 2015. I'm not sure I've ever seen a time where Texas was this involved in as many hotly contested recruiting battles against other elite programs for players both in the state of Texas and outside of the state of Texas. Of those 4 players that we talked about, only one of them plays his high school football in Texas. So this is the Longhorns expanding their reach around the country. And that's not going to stop with just these 4, right? That will go for the next couple of weeks. That will go for the remainder of this cycle. And that's going to go well beyond 2026 as well. Like before our eyes, Steve Sarkisian is morphing Texas into a national brand that, look, it focuses primarily on a regional recruiting power, but it's got now national recruiting power. Like Texas is showing its full-fledged national recruiting power that flexes its muscles pretty much anywhere that it goes. You're not just trying to stay in state. You now feel like you can win recruiting battles against blue blood programs from around the country. You feel like we saw it with Justice Terry, right, from the state of Georgia. Texas going into Bulldog territory, bringing home a top 10 player in the class last year. Like Texas is showing that they can win these recruiting battles everywhere they go. So we'll see how many of these 4 Texas can land. Maybe they land 3, maybe they land 4, maybe they land 0. But the point is, this is a new era of recruiting for Texas. They are hanging with the big dogs. This is what Alabama was doing under Nick Saban. This is what Georgia has been doing under Kirby Smart. This is what Ohio State has been doing in the last decade. That's why those 3 teams have been winning national championships more than anybody else. Recruiting is the lifeblood of any college football program. Yeah, it's great to recruit your state and your region, but being able to bring in top-flight talent from the other 49 states is really, really important. This is what you want as a Texas fan. Again, I feel like it is a new dawn for Texas recruiting. The Longhorns morphing themselves into a national brand and a national recruiting power. The transformation is happening right before our eyes. Credit Steve Sarkisian, credit Brandon Harris, credit the entirety of the Texas coaching staff, the recruiting staff, and everybody on campus who has made this possible. It is a fun time to be covering recruiting, and I don't think the fun is going to stop anytime soon. So there you go. Big picture thoughts on what Texas is turning into from a recruiting standpoint. All right. I was in transit yesterday, so I wasn't able to record an episode, but we have to talk about the 2 weekend commits that the Longhorns landed for the class of 2026. And we will do that next right here on Locked On Longhorns. But first, a word for our friends at FanDuel. The summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball, golf, soccer, it doesn't matter. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are just getting sunburn at the beach, hanging out by the pool, whatever. You can win money on all of these summer sports. The FanDuel app is so fun and so easy to use. FanDuel.com is awesome. It's easy to bet, it's fast to bet, and they pay out very, very quickly. You could bet before games. Heck, you could bet on a baseball game going into the bottom of the 9th inning. More ways to win with our friends at FanDuel than ever before. And again, if you are new to FanDuel, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's that simple. $150 in bonus bets coming your way if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, welcome back to Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Again, apologies for no Monday show. I was flying back from New York, back in the home studio for the foreseeable future, but unfortunately wasn't able to record anything yesterday. Obviously, a big weekend for Texas football on the recruiting trail as the Longhorns were able to land 2 more commitments for the class of 2026. The first one happened on Saturday when 4-star defensive lineman Bodney Cleveland committed to Texas from Birmingham, Alabama. Speaking of going out of state and bringing in top flight talent, Bodney Cleveland was the top-ranked defensive lineman in the state of Alabama. And Texas got him to commit to Texas over Alabama, over Auburn, over Georgia, over any of those other traditional regional powers in the Southeast. Bodney Cleveland was on campus last weekend, and he committed, again, a couple of days ago on Saturday. 6'3", 305 pounds. He's a top 150 player nationally, the 18th ranked defensive lineman overall in this class. But once again, the top ranked D lineman in the state of Alabama. Texas able to go in there and poach him away from the Crimson Tide. That is great news. And again, Bodney Cleveland, Corey Wells, Dylan Berryman, 3 defensive line commitments for Kenny Baker and Alan Clark in the month of June alone. They are rolling up front on defense, and Steve Sarkisian continues to make the defensive line a big priority for this class. And speaking of the defensive line, speaking of priorities, how about the news from Sunday? 5-star edge rusher Richard Wesley committing to Texas. From Southern California, another out-of-stater, a guy who was originally a part of the class of 2027. He was a top 5 player in the country in next year's class, decided to reclassify to 2026. He's still considered a top 15 player in this cycle and the number 2 edge rusher in 2026. The one-time Oregon commit decommitted, I think, like 2.5 weeks after committing to Oregon, and Texas is able to get him. So, you always worry and you always wonder about guys who committed and decommitted somewhere else. This is one that you're probably going to have to recruit through the whistle, but obviously great news that Texas is able to add another 5-star to its class. Richard Wesley, 6'5", listed at 250 pounds. He was in town, not this most recent weekend, but the previous weekend on an official visit, and Texas did enough to get the commitment on Sunday. This is a supreme talent. I saw somebody, I think it was on 24/7 Sports yesterday, say that Richard Wesley was the best edge rushing prospect in the state of California since Kayvon Thibodeau, who was one of the top players in his class coming out of high school. Some sites had him as the number one player in America coming out of high school. Had a great career at Oregon. Ended up as a top 10 pick in the NFL draft with the New York Giants, having a very good start to his pro career. If Richard Wesley is the next Kayvon Thibodeau, then yeah, Texas got something very, very special. So a 4-star D lineman, a 5-star edge. Richard Wesley, the second highest ranked player in the class right now for the Longhorns, behind only the quarterback Dia Bell. This is a big time pickup for Texas, and more evidence that the Longhorns are crushing it when it comes to defensive line recruiting. And yeah, I'm throwing the edge position into the D-line for the sake of this conversation. About 4 D-line / edge commits for Texas in the month of June. Texas has 7 players who committed this month, 4 of them on the defensive line. Another tip of the cap to Kenny Baker and Alan Clark. This is now 2 years in a row for Kenny Baker doing this. We saw what he did bringing in Justice Terry and Myron Charles and Josiah Sharma last year. Now we're seeing what he's doing this year. And obviously, Alan Clark, the new hire, the new edge coach that Texas poached away from Ohio State, he's doing a fantastic job on the recruiting trail as well. Both of those guys instrumental to the success that Texas has had up front. And how about some of these stats to just talk about how good of a job Texas is doing recruiting the defensive line? The Longhorns have landed more top 24/7 defensive line prospects in the last 2 cycles than any other program in America. So looking at the 24/7 sports rankings for these, Texas has landed more top 24/7 D-line prospects in the nation in the last 2 years than any other team. And it's only June. We just talked about the Mari Simeon. He could be coming. There are a few other Texas targets that the Longhorns could land before we get to National Signing Day in December. So Texas could be adding more. They could be widening their gap over every other school when it comes to bringing in these blue chip D-line prospects. This is amazing. It is now 6 in the last 2 years that Texas has brought in on the defensive line. And it's just a night and day difference between Kenny Baker and Bo Davis. Not to throw shade at Bo Davis. I don't want him to be catching too many strays. He did some great things in both of his stints as the defensive line coach at Texas. But in his 3 full recruiting cycles in Austin in the Steve Sarkisian era from 2022 to 2024, he signed 7 total defensive linemen. None of them were top 24/7 prospects. 3 of those 7 were 4 stars. The other 4 were 3 stars. Again, he developed guys really well. Texas had solid defensive line play in 2023. Really solid defensive line play. Look at Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Those guys were awesome. So Bo Davis, again, deserves credit for that. But from a recruiting standpoint, he just wasn't bringing in top flight talent, at least on paper. And Kenny Baker, again, it's 6 in the last 2 years. Bo Davis had 0 top 24/7 guys in 3 years. Kenny Baker has 6 in the last 2 years, and this cycle isn't even done yet. So the job that Kenny Baker is doing compared to what Bo Davis was doing is absolutely incredible. And Texas has something special with Kenny Baker. We did a whole segment about him maybe 2 weeks ago. Not a guy that moved the needle for a lot of Longhorn fans when Steve Sarkisian hired him a couple of years ago. He did a great job on the field with Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton and the rest of the Texas D-line in 2024. He's doing an even better job on the recruiting front. Texas has something special with Kenny Baker, and I think Alan Clark has been a great supplement for him in recruiting efforts. Big time what Texas is doing up front. So now the Longhorns have 15 players committed in the class of 2026. Again, it's the 10th ranked class in the country as we record on June 24th. But I will never argue with building through the trenches. And Texas, look, 5 defensive line transfers. That's pretty good for the short term. But obviously bringing in these big-time recruits from high school is going to benefit the Longhorns in the long term. Love the job that Texas is doing up front on defense. I got to get that to translate to the offensive line as well. All right, so great news for Texas football from the weekend. Wanted to give my thoughts on the 2 newest members of the Horns recruiting class. It's not just football with the good news. How about Texas baseball? The Longhorns continuing to dominate the transfer portal. We've got 2 more commitments to talk about, and I'll tell you why what's happening is a great sign for the future of Longhorn baseball under Jim Schlossnagle. We'll talk some Longhorn baseball when we return right here on Locked On Longhorns. All right, welcome back to Locked On Longhorns. Oh, I think I clicked that twice accidentally. My bad. Welcome back to Locked On Longhorns, your team every day, talking Texas baseball here as the offseason is officially upon us. It's been upon Texas for a while, but now the college baseball season is officially over as LSU won its 8th national championship in program history. That's now 2 more than Texas. The Longhorns have a little bit of catching up to do to their neighbors out east, but the college baseball offseason is upon us, and Texas continues to do work in the transfer portal. Maybe the biggest pickup yet for Texas. Notre Dame transfer Carson Tinney is coming to Austin. Rylan Galvan, one of the best catchers in America this past season for the Longhorns. He is likely off to the pros, the MLB draft coming up in a few weeks. I think Rylan Galvan will be a very high draft pick, and I think everybody expects him to sign with whatever team drafts him. So the Longhorns had a bit of a void at catcher, and what a way to fill the void. Carson Tinney, who was one of the 3 finalists for the Buster Posey Award as the best catcher in college baseball, Rylan Galvan is another one of those finalists. So Texas is losing a finalist, and they are going to replace him with another finalist. Carson Tinney coming over from Notre Dame, a first-team All-American in 2025. How about some of these numbers? Hit .348 with 17 homers and 53 RBIs for Notre Dame as a sophomore this season. A little bit of a disappointing season for the Fighting Irish. They did not make it to the postseason, but you can't blame Carson Tinney for that because of the numbers that he put up. And I think, look, Notre Dame missing the postseason is a big part of why Carson Tinney is transferring. He is about to be a junior, which means he can go pro after next season. Could have stayed at Notre Dame, had another great year, and been a very high draft pick in the 2026 MLB draft. But he wants to win. And Texas won the SEC in year 1 in the conference. The Longhorns were the number 2 national seed this season. So I think, the job that Jim Schlossnagle was able to do in year 1, and I think, Carson Tinney saw the success that Texas had. He saw the success that Rylan Galvan had behind the plate, and he wanted to be a part of that. How about an OPS over 1250? Not sure I mentioned that, but again, video game numbers for Tinney. Everybody wanted this guy. Florida and Georgia were seemingly the biggest competitors to Texas in this recruitment. Texas was able to land him. Incredible power, top 10 in the country in average exit velo this past season. He's got great arm strength behind the plate, too. He's a plus framer as well, so you don't have to worry about defense with Carson Tinney. He's going to be a plus guy in that department as well. And again, one of the best power hitters in the sport this past season. This is a massive pickup. The top transfer portal catcher that was available. And again, Rylan Galvan was such a big piece for Texas this year and a huge part of the Longhorn success. You don't want to have a big drop-off at that position, at any position, but especially at that position, and bringing in a multi-year starter who has had the success that Tinney has had. That is a huge get for Jim Schlossnagle and company. Carson Tinney going to be a middle-of-the-order bat for Texas, just like Rylan Galvan was. So that was one commitment that Texas has picked up over the last couple of days. Another transfer addition for the Longhorns, Stanford shortstop Timo Becerra is coming to Texas. He is likely your Jalen Flores replacement. Again, Flores, another one of those guys who will hear his name called at some point in the MLB draft. Flores didn't have the year Galvan had. Flores didn't have the year that he wanted to have. Didn't have the year that any of us wanted him to have. But I still expect him to get drafted. And I think the fact that Becerra, who is a grad transfer, meaning he only has 1 year of eligibility remaining, the fact that he chose Texas over a number of other schools that were interested kind of leads you to believe that he thinks he's going to start at shortstop at Texas, which you put 2 and 2 together and start connecting some dots, means that Jalen Flores is off to the professional ranks. Timo Becerra, if that name is familiar, he was actually a part of the 2023 Omaha team for Stanford. And that hurts because, well, Stanford beat Texas in a super regional thanks to a marine layer and some horrible lighting at the Sunken Diamond in Palo Alto. But Becerra went 3 for 8 in that best-of-3 super regional against the Longhorns a couple of years ago. So if that name rings a bell, that might be why. Becerra, a multi-year starter at Stanford, hit .330 for the Cardinal this past season with 37 RBIs. Not a power guy. at all. Only 3 homers in 3 years of college baseball. So that was something that Jalen Flores had that Becerra doesn't, the ability to hit the ball out of the ballpark. But Becerra, a very solid average guy, a very good defender. He's got a strong arm at short. And again, 1 year of eligibility. So he is a rental, but he will likely be Texas's starting shortstop. I know the Longhorns were going hard after a Virginia shortstop. Should have written his name down. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But Virginia's shortstop hit the portal. Texas went after him hard. He ended up withdrawing his name and ended up going back to UVA. So Texas couldn't get their top shortstop target, but they do get a good one. Again, a multi-year starter at a major program in Stanford with Timo Becerra coming in. Great news for Texas. Obviously, you get 2 starters to replace 2 very important guys to your 2025 team. But this is all a sign, and these are all signs, that the buy-in for Texas baseball is real. That was maybe the biggest issue at the end of the David Pierce era. He wasn't getting the support financially that he needed to compete at the highest level. Now, I'm not blaming all of David Pierce's shortcomings on lack of NIL support, but Texas's roster just wasn't talented enough to hang with the best teams in college baseball. And that was because a lot of the big money donors just didn't believe in David Pierce and they wanted a change. So that was a big part of why Texas paid David Pierce's buyout and why they went out and stole Jim Schlossnagle away from A&M. Everybody was excited about the hire at the time. Number one, you steal from little brother. Number two, you hire a coach who was 1 win away from a national title the year before. Schloss has a very, very impressive resume. So everybody loved the hire when it happened. But to see Texas go out and win the SEC in year 1, that put all the BBs back in the box. And that got everybody reinvested into Texas baseball. And baseball is the number 2 sport here in Austin. A lot of places it's football 1 and men's basketball 2. Then baseball is kind of a distant third. I don't have to explain to you Texas fans how important Texas baseball is. The Longhorns, one of the most historic programs in the sport, and they're going to get financial support when people believe in where the program is headed. Again, didn't feel like people were believing where things were going under David Pierce. Feels like the buy-in is back with Jim Schlossnagle. You don't get the 8 portal additions that Texas has gotten unless you have some money coming into the program. Thanks to the Texas One Fund and thanks to everybody who contributes to the Texas One Fund for making that possible. But this is all a great sign if you are a Longhorn baseball fan. The buy-in is real. Texas is losing a lot from this year's club, there's no doubt, but they are doing a fantastic job, both in terms of pitching and in terms of hitting, at replenishing the talent. And I don't think there's going to be a big drop-off at all for the Longhorns in 2026. All right, very positive show. First show of the week. We're keeping things light, keeping things fun here on Locked On Longhorns. If you made it this far, number 1, thank you. Number 2, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those great things. Rate 5 stars if you're listening via podcast. Really appreciate y'all making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Portal Show. Brian Smith has all of the latest rumors, portal entries, signings. He's also talking plenty of high school recruiting as well. So you can be the most informed fan with all of the rapid changes happening in the college football landscape. Just find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. More recruiting conversation, and hey, we might have another commit or 2 to talk about on tomorrow's show, but that is going to do it for this one. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, horns up, mic's off. We'll see y'all soon. This is Locked On Longhorns.